The laughter, sharp and brittle as shattered champagne flutes, followed Amelia Sterling from the sun-drenched patio into the cavernous, marble-tiled foyer of the Sterling estate. It clung to the back of her simple silk dress, a whisper of gold digger that had long since crescendoed into a chorus. She paused at the foot of the grand staircase, her fingers tightening around the cool banister until her knuckles shone white. 5 years. 5 years of sidelong glances at charity galas, of thinly veiled editorials in the society pages, of her husband's children, her stepchildren, holding court in corners, their eyes like chips of ice assessing a flawed jewel. They saw a waitress from a diner, a woman 22 years younger than the venerable Charles Sterling, and they saw a transaction. They never saw the quiet conversations in the library, the shared solace over lost dreams, the way Charles's arthritic hand would seek hers under the table, a silent anchor in a room full of sharks. Charles, whose love was the one irrefutable truth in her gilded cage, was now fading in the hospital, a billionaire reduced to the fragile rhythm of a ventilator, and the sharks had begun to circle in earnest. The call came as she stood there, adrift in the echoes of their scorn. Charles's doctor, his voice a low, solemn thread. "It's time, Mrs. Sterling. He's asking for you." The drive to the hospital was a blur of gray streets and the frantic hammering of her own heart. The Sterling clan, Alastair, the eldest, a corporate predator with a smile that never reached his eyes, Penelope, whose elegance was a weapon she wielded with surgical precision, and Sebastian, the charming, dissolute youngest, were already assembled in the hushed, antiseptic hallway. They formed a united front of disdain, blocking her path to his room. "He's not coherent, Amelia," Alastair stated, his voice smooth and final. "You've taken enough from him. Let the family say goodbye in peace." The raw injustice of it, the sheer venom, stole her breath. She was his wife. The love in his eyes when he looked at her was the one thing their money couldn't buy and their cynicism couldn't erode. A nurse, witnessing the standoff with wide eyes, intervened, murmuring that Mr. Sterling was indeed asking for his wife, alone. The look of pure, unadulterated hatred that passed between the siblings as she slipped past them was a physical force. Charles was a ghost of himself amidst the whirring machines, but his eyes, when they found hers, held a familiar, stubborn light. His voice was a papery rustle, each word a monumental effort. "Amelia, my dearest, they'll come for you, like vultures. The house, the lake house. The truth is in the boathouse, behind the old world map. For you, only for you." He squeezed her hand with a surprising final strength. "Use it. Don't be gentle." And then, with a last, rattling sigh that seemed to empty the room of all its air, he was gone. The monitor emitted a long, flat whine that echoed the screaming void inside her. The door burst open immediately, the Sterling clan surging in, but their theatrical grief was a pantomime performed for the doctors. Their eyes were already calculating, sharp with the promise of a coming war. The funeral was a masterclass in hypocrisy. Under a slate-gray sky, Amelia stood apart, a widow in black, feeling the weight of 1,000 judgments. The eulogies, delivered by Alastair and Penelope, were elegantly coded monuments to their father's legacy, subtly painting Amelia as a fleeting, unfortunate distraction in an otherwise pristine narrative. The wake at the Sterling mansion was worse, a macabre celebration of inheritance. As lawyers moved through the crowds with solemn faces, Amelia felt the trap tightening. She was served with papers before the last of the canapes were cleared. A lawsuit challenging the validity of the most recent will, the one that left her the primary beneficiary, including the controlling shares in Sterling Global. The grounds: undue influence. The gold digger narrative, finally weaponized by expensive legal letterhead. Alastair cornered her in the library, his paternal facade gone. "Sign over the shares, Amelia. Take the lake house and a modest allowance. We'll make the lawsuit disappear. You can fade away with some dignity. Fight us, and we'll drag you through every tabloid and court until you're not just penniless, but broken." The threat hung in the air, thicker than the cigar smoke that once belonged to Charles. That night, shrouded in a grief so profound it felt like a physical illness, Amelia thought of Charles's last words. The lake house. It was a modest cedar-shingled property on a remote wind-swept lake, a place Charles had always spoken of with a softness he reserved for few things. He'd called it his soul's anchor. To the family, it was a quaint, worthless relic. To Amelia, it was now a cryptic inheritance. She drove there at dawn, the sprawling city giving way to dense pine forests and lonely roads. The house was cold, musty, filled with the ghosts of a simpler Charles, fly-fishing rods, battered leather armchairs, shelves of well-thought-out philosophy, not finance. The boathouse sagged at the water's edge, its timbers groaning. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and motor oil. On the wall, as he'd said, was a large, old-fashioned map of the world, stained by time and moisture. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she pried at its edges. It resisted, then gave way with a groan, revealing not a wall, but a small, dark recess. Inside was not a stack of bonds or a second will, but a simple, fireproof lockbox. The key was around her neck, on the chain that held her wedding ring, a small, intricate silver key Charles had given her on their first anniversary with a cryptic smile. "For when you really need to remember me," he'd said. It fit. The lock clicked open with a sound like a sigh. Inside lay a thick, leather-bound journal, and beneath it, a sleek, portable hard drive. She opened the journal with trembling hands. It was Charles's handwriting, but a younger, fiercer script. It was not a diary of love, but a ledger of sins. Page after page detailed the founding of Sterling Global, not as a tale of entrepreneurial genius, but as a chronicle of betrayal, espionage, environmental neglect, and clandestine deals with brutal regimes. It named names, dates, account numbers. It detailed the tragedy at the Argent silver mine, a collapse the official reports called an act of God, but Charles's notes coldly described as the result of criminally neglected safety protocols, covered up with bribes and threats. The victims' families were silenced with pittances. But the most chilling entries were personal. They laid bare the truth about his beloved first wife, Eleanor, her tragic early death from a rapid cancer, mourned by all, was revealed here in stark, horrifying detail. Charles had discovered too late that the innovative building materials he'd used to construct their first dream home, materials championed by his then-partner, a man named Forsyth, were laced with carcinogenic compounds. Eleanor had been poisoned by her own walls, a slow, invisible murder for which Charles held himself eternally responsible. The partner, Forsyth, had known. He'd been paid off, his silence bought with a fortune that launched his own political career.
And the children, Alastair, Penelope, Sebastian. The journal's later entries, written in a more tired, despairing hand, revealed his growing disillusionment. He wrote of Alastair's insider trading, using company leverage for personal gain on a staggering scale. He documented Penelope's art foundation, a beautiful facade for laundering money from dubious Eastern European contacts. He chronicled Sebastian's descent into a world of dark web dealings and addiction, paid for by draining trust funds and embezzling from charitable wings. Charles had known everything. The weight of his empire's sins and his family's corruption had become an unbearable burden. Amelia, with her uncomplicated love, her lack of greed, her quiet strength, had been his respite, his chance at redemption. Leaving her the company was not the doting folly of an old man. It was a desperate, calculated strike. He was giving her the only weapon powerful enough to protect herself: the truth. The hard drive contained the digital proof, scanned documents, encrypted emails, audio recordings of board meetings where cover-ups were planned, video of secret transfers. It was a guided missile aimed at the very heart of the Sterling legacy. Amelia sat on the dusty boathouse floor, the journal heavy in her lap. The grief was still there, but now it was alloyed with a cold, clarifying fury. They called her a gold digger. They saw her as a parasite. But Charles had made her the executor of his conscience, the curator of their ruin. She wasn't the thief. She was the reckoning. The moral shock of it was immense, a tidal wave that reshaped the entire shoreline of the past 5 years. The love was real, but it had been a sanctuary built within a fortress of lies. Now the fortress was hers to command or to destroy. The legal battle became a theater of the absurd. Amelia's lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Claire Watanabe, was initially puzzled by her client's calm resolve. The case is strong, but they have endless resources to delay, to smear, Claire warned. Amelia simply nodded. Let them. The tabloids, undoubtedly fed by the Sterlings, went into a frenzy. Black Widow in waiting? Screamed one headline. Mourning or counting? Sneered another. Penelope gave a tearful interview about protecting her father's life's work from a stranger's greedy hands. Alistair gave sober statements about corporate governance and family duty. Sebastian, in a rare sober moment, made a crude joke about Amelia at a club that was gleefully reported. Through it all, Amelia remained silent. She attended court dates, a somber, elegant figure, speaking only when necessary. The family mistook her silence for weakness, for the crumbling of a woman out of her depth. Their offers of settlement grew more condescending, their public attacks more vicious. They were not just trying to win, they were trying to annihilate her character, to make the world see the monster they had invented. Little did they know, Amelia was meticulously preparing. With Claire's help and a small, trusted team of forensic experts paid from a secret account Charles had also left her, she began indexing the evidence. She didn't just want to win the lawsuit, she wanted justice. For Charles's tortured soul, for Eleanor, for the nameless miners in Argentina, for all the ghosts in the Sterling closet. The turning point came during a critical deposition. Alistair, under oath, was elaborating on his father's purported mental decline in his final years, painting a picture of a man easily manipulated by a younger woman. Amelia's lawyer gently placed a document before him. It was a financial record pulled from the hard drive showing a multi-million-dollar transfer from a Sterling subsidiary to an offshore shell company whose ultimate beneficiary was an account under Alistair's mistress's name. "Can you explain this transaction, Mr. Sterling?" Claire asked, her voice mild. Alistair's face, so often a mask of smug assurance, went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving a waxy pallor. He stammered, demanded to know where she got that, accused her of fabrication. But the document was pristine, its provenance a mystery that filled the room with a sudden, electric dread. The deposition was suspended amidst chaotic protests from the Sterling legal team. That was the first crack. Amelia did not unleash the full storm at once. She let them stew. A week later, an anonymous tip led financial regulators to a series of suspicious trades, perfectly matching the dates and amounts in Charles's journal regarding Alistair's insider dealing. The news hit the business channels like a thunderclap. Sterling Global stock began a sickening slide. Panicked, the family convened, their unity fracturing under the pressure. They blamed each other, each suspecting the other of cutting a deal with Amelia to save themselves. Amelia then visited Penelope's coveted art foundation. She didn't confront her. She simply stood in front of a newly acquired, hideously expensive modernist piece, paid for with funds from a Belarusian benefactor detailed in Charles's files. A reporter, tipped off anonymously, asked Penelope about the foundation's stringent due diligence processes. The footage of Penelope's flustered, evasive response went viral. Whispers of money laundering became a roar. Her society friends, scenting scandal, began to evaporate. Sebastian was the easiest mark. Amelia had no need for subtlety with him. She sent a courier with a single sheet of paper, a screenshot of a dark web transaction log detailing purchases that were not only illegal, but profoundly disturbing. The note attached read, "The next email goes to the FBI Cybercrimes Unit. Check into rehab today or lose everything, including your freedom." Sebastian, a coward at his core, was on a plane to a Swiss clinic within 12 hours. The family fortress was crumbling, and they knew, with a dawning, horrific certainty, that Amelia was the architect. The lawsuit was now the least of their worries. Alastair, desperate and cornered, came to the lake house himself. He found Amelia on the porch watching the gray lake churn under a stormy sky. The arrogance was gone, replaced with a wild, fearful rage. "What do you want? You've won. Take the company, take the money. Just stop this." Amelia turned to him, her eyes calm, reflecting the storm. "You never understood, Alastair. This was never about the money. You called me a gold digger because that's all you can comprehend. You see everything as a transaction. Love, loyalty, family, it's all currency to be traded." She took a step closer, her voice dropping colder than the rain. "Your father left me the truth, and the truth isn't for spending. It's for settling accounts. For the miners in Argentina your father killed. For your mother, who your father's ambition murdered. For every person you've stepped on, every rule you've broken thinking there was no price." "You're insane! You'll destroy everything he built!" Alastair shouted. "No," she said softly. "He already did. I'm just pulling down the rotten scaffolding." The final act was not played out in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Amelia, through her lawyer, released a carefully curated, devastating selection of evidence to a consortium of major international newspapers and regulatory bodies. She did not give interviews, she provided facts. The story that exploded was not about a gold-digging widow, but about the systemic, generational corruption of the Sterling dynasty. It was a saga of greed, betrayal, and murderous negligence. The headlines were apocalyptic. Sterling legacy built on lies and corpses. A family's Faustian bargain. The billionaire's deathbed confession.
The fallout was instantaneous and total. Sterling Global stock was suspended, then plummeted into worthless oblivion as government agencies across 3 continents launched investigations. Alastair was arrested at his office, handcuffed and paraded past his horrified staff for securities fraud and conspiracy. Penelope's foundation was shuttered, her assets frozen, her name a byword for hypocrisy and crime. Sebastian, in his Swiss clinic, was extradited to face a slew of charges. The vast Sterling fortune, built on a foundation of sand and sin, was devoured by lawsuits, fines, and reparations. Amelia watched it all from the porch of the lake house. She felt no triumph, only a profound, weary emptiness. The world now knew her not as a gold digger, but as an avenging angel, a ruthless dismantler of an empire. The truth had ruined them, as Charles knew it would, but it had also hollowed her out.
She had loved a man who was both her sanctuary and a keeper of terrible secrets. The love was real, but it was now a complicated, painful artifact, like a beautiful vase cracked through with dark, indelible lines. In the end, she kept very little. She donated the bulk of the remaining legitimate assets to causes Eleanor would have championed: cancer research, mine safety advocacy, ethical business initiatives. She kept the lake house, the journals, and the hard drive locked in a safe, not as trophies, but as memorials to the man Charles could have been, and to the brutal education she never asked for. The world moved on to new scandals, but the name Sterling became a cautionary tale, a synonym for ruin. And Amelia, the woman they called a gold digger, finally found a quiet, unobserved peace, living a life of simple means, her past a ghost that walked beside her on the lonely shores of the lake, a constant reminder that the most dangerous treasures are never gold, but truth, and that sometimes redemption looks an awful lot like ruin. The silence that settled over the lake house in the wake of the storm was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the last gunshot has faded, a ringing, hollow emptiness filled with ghosts and the scent of scorched earth. Amelia moved through the cedar-scented rooms like one of those ghosts herself, her actions automatic, brewing tea she didn't drink, straightening blankets that were already smooth. The world outside had devoured the Sterling saga with rapacious hunger. The headlines had shifted, the 24-hour news cycle had found new carrion, but the echo of the collapse was a permanent vibration in the air around her. She had won. She had unmasked them, broken them, and in doing so, she had atomized the very world she had inhabited for 5 years. The love that had been her anchor was now a tangled wreck at the bottom of a sea of lies. Who had she loved? The gentle, weary man who held her in the library? Or the ruthless architect of a poisonous empire who had, in his final act of contrition, made her his executioner? Both, she supposed. The truth, as it turned out, was not a clean sword, but a jagged, mirrored shard, and she saw herself reflected in it, fractured and unfamiliar. A week after Alastair's perp walk was splashed across the globe, a sleek black sedan, incongruous against the gravel road, crunched to a halt outside the lake house. It was not a reporter. The few who dared make the pilgrimage had been turned away by a new, discreet security system. From the car emerged a woman in her late 60s, her posture erect, her silver hair coiled in an impeccable chignon. She wore a simple but severe black coat, and her eyes, as she approached the porch where Amelia stood frozen, held a lifetime of polished grief. Amelia recognized her instantly from portraits. Eleanor Sterling's sister, Margot Fitzroy, the woman Charles's journal had mentioned with a note of fearful respect. The one person, he wrote, who had suspected the truth about Eleanor's illness and had been quietly, relentlessly shut out. Margot did not wait for an invitation. She climbed the steps, her gaze sweeping over Amelia with an assessment that was neither hostile nor friendly, but profoundly analytical. "So," she said, her voice like dry leaves, "you are the instrument." Amelia found her voice, though it felt rusty. "I didn't seek this out." A faint, bitter smile touched Margot's lips. "Neither did I, yet here we are. May I come in? I find I have little patience for the chill these days." Inside, by the crackling fire, Margot sat with a stiffness that spoke of old discipline. She accepted a cup of tea, but did not drink it. "You left him the journals," she stated, not a question. "Yes. And you released the parts about the business, the mine, the bribes." Margot's eyes were fixed on the flames. "But you did not release the pages about my sister, Eleanor." Amelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the lake. That was private. It was a crime, but it was also their tragedy. It didn't seem right to offer it to the wolves. Margot turned her head slowly, and for the first time, raw emotion flickered in her eyes. a deep, burning pain. "Private?" she repeated softly. "For 27 years, I have lived with a private truth. I watched my vibrant, brilliant sister wither in that beautiful, toxic tomb of a house. I heard the doctor's bewildered shrugs. I saw Charles's guilt, a monstrous thing he wore like a hair shirt. But he never spoke it. He buried it with her and built his mausoleum of money on top." She leaned forward, her composure cracking. "Do you know what it is to scream into a pillow of silence for decades? To have your grief invalidated by a polished lie of tragic fate? You speak of justice for minors in a foreign country. What of justice for Eleanor? What of justice for me?" The accusation hung in the room, heavier than the smoke from the fire. Amelia felt a surge of defensive shame. She had played God with the truth, parceling it out for strategic impact, deciding which sins were for public consumption and which were to be kept in the dark. In trying to protect the memory of a dead woman, had she perpetuated the silence that killed her? "I'm sorry," Amelia whispered, the words utterly inadequate. "Sorry does not unpoison the well," Margot said, but the fury had ebbed, replaced by a profound exhaustion. "He told you, at the end. He gave you the power I begged him for years to use. I don't know if I hate you for it or envy you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a faded manila envelope, its edges soft with age. "I have nothing left to lose. The world knows the Sterlings are monsters now. But the world does not know the full portrait of the chief monster. Charles was a complicated man, perhaps, a remorseful one in the end, but he was also a coward. For decades he protected the man who knowingly sold him those death traps for his home, Arthur Forsyth." The name was a dagger from the journal. The partner, the politician. "Forsyth is retired now," Margot continued, "a respected elder statesman living in philanthropic bliss in Georgetown. His foundation champions public health. He gives speeches about corporate responsibility." She pushed the envelope across the table. "My private truth, years of my own investigation, witness statements from bankrupted contractors who knew the materials were faulty, lab reports I bribed a doomed technician to copy. Forsyth didn't just know. He orchestrated the cover-up when the first safety reports came in. He threatened the lab. He destroyed evidence. Charles paid him off to save the company from scandal, and in doing so, sentenced his own wife to a slow, agonizing death. This," she tapped the envelope, "connects the last dot. Forsyth didn't just get rich. He built his political career on my sister's bones." Amelia looked at the envelope as if it were a live serpent. "Why give this to me? Take it to the press, to the police." "Because you are the instrument," Margot said again, her voice final. "You hold the credibility. You have the narrative. A grieving widow uncovering her husband's darkest secret to expose the true killer. It has a poetic justice the press will froth over. My coming forward looks like the vengeance of a bitter old woman. You coming forward is the final act of Charles Sterling's confession. It completes the ruin. It makes the circle whole." She stood up, smoothing her coat. "Do with it what your conscience demands, but know this. Keeping it private now is not an act of mercy. It is an act of complicity. You have pulled down the scaffolding, Amelia, but the deepest, foulest part of the foundation is still there, polished and presentable, giving speeches about ethics. Eleanor deserves a headstone that tells the truth." Margot left as quietly as she had arrived, the black sedan dissolving into the gathering twilight. Amelia sat alone in the lengthening shadows, the envelope before her. The weight of it was different from the lockbox. That had been Charles's burden, thrust upon her. This was a choice, a conscious, deliberate step from being a weapon of defense to becoming a spear of outright attack. Could she do it? To unleash this would be to savage Charles's memory beyond any repair. It would paint him not just as a complicit coward, but as a man who valued his empire over his wife's very life. The love she cherished would become, in the public eye, a grotesque farce. And yet, Margot was right. What was the value of a truth only half told? Was her loyalty to the ghost of the man she loved, or to the objective, terrifying totality of what he had done? For days, she wrestled with the ghosts. She read Margot's file. It was meticulous, cold, and damning. The technician's affidavit, signed days before his own death from lung cancer, asbestos exposure, the report noted dryly, the bank transfers from shell companies to Forsyth's early campaign fund, timed perfectly with the suppression of the lab reports, a photograph of a younger, harder-looking Forsyth shaking hands with a clearly terrified site foreman. This was not corporate malfeasance. This was premeditated, knowing murder for profit. The final push came from an unexpected quarter. A plain official envelope arrived, containing a letter from the Argentine consulate. It was written in formal but deeply heartfelt Spanish and translated by a crisp note from a junior diplomat. It thanked her, Senora Sterling, for her courage. The information she had provided had allowed the authorities to reopen the investigation into the Mina de Plata collapse. For the first time, families were hearing apologies, not excuses. Compensation, however inadequate, was being discussed. A memorial was being planned. The letter was signed by dozens of names, the children and grandchildren of the lost miners. Enclosed was a small woven bracelet, una pulsera, made of red and green thread. For protection, the note said, and to remind you that you are not alone in seeking light after a long darkness. Amelia held the fragile bracelet, its threads humble against the polished wood of the lakehouse table. These people, across an ocean who owed her nothing, saw in her not a gold digger or an avenging angel, but a bearer of light. However painful, however destructive, the truth had given them a form of peace. What peace had she given Eleanor? What light had she shed on that particular darkness? She had traded in truths that served her purpose, that protected the fragile, painful memory of her own love. That was not justice. That was sentimentality. And sentimentality, Charles's journal seemed to whisper from its shelf, was the luxury of those who are not yet truly accountable. She called Claire Watanabe. "There's more," Amelia said, her voice steadier than it had felt in weeks. "I need to meet with the prosecutors on the federal case, and then I need you to coordinate with the Guardian and the Washington Post. We're not just giving them documents. I'm giving a statement." The process was slower this time, more surgical. The federal investigators, already neck-deep in Sterling Global, received the new evidence with grim nods. It fit a pattern, a pathology. Arthur Forsyth was quietly subpoenaed. Amelia's public statement, released simultaneously with the news of the expanded investigation, was brief and devastating. She did not appear on camera. She provided a written testimony. "In uncovering my late husband's legacy, I believed I had found the darkest of his secrets. I was wrong. The darkest secret was not a business decision, but a personal, profound betrayal. His first wife, Eleanor Sterling, did not die of a tragic, random illness. She was poisoned by the materials used to build her home, materials known to be dangerously toxic by his business partner, Arthur Forsyth. Charles discovered this too late and chose to protect his company and his partner rather than expose the truth and honor his wife's memory. He lived with that guilt every day. In leaving me his records, he offered me a choice: to continue the silence or to end it. For Eleanor, for her family who has waited decades for answers, and for anyone who believes powerful men are above the law, the silence ends today. Some truths are too corrosive to remain in the dark. This is one of them." The effect was thermonuclear. Forsyth's venerable statesman facade vaporized overnight. The headlines were even more personal, more visceral. A house built on death. From political star to poisoner. The widow's final vindication, a second murder exposed. The philanthropy, the speeches, the respect, all of it was recast as a decades-long performance of grotesque hypocrisy. He was indicted for fraud, conspiracy, and manslaughter. The Sterling story, which had begun to fade, was reignited with a white-hot fury, this time with a new, even more despised villain at its center. Charles was now seen more clearly as a tragically weak man, destroyed by his own moral failings, but Forsyth was the true archvillain. In the aftermath, Margot Fitzroy sent a single word via text. "Thank you."
Amelia walked out to the end of the old dock, the woven pulsera tied around her wrist. The water was calm, mirroring a sky streaked with the fiery colors of dusk. She felt scoured clean, empty of every secret, every weapon, every defense. She had done it. She had used the truth, all of it, and it had ruined them all, Charles included. The love was still there, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a memorial in a field of ruins. She was no one's gold digger. She was no one's angel. She was simply the woman who had been handed a lit match in a house soaked in gasoline and who had, after a terrible hesitation, let it fall. The future was a blank page, terrifying in its openness. She would likely leave the lake house. It was too filled with ghosts, with the whisper of maps and lockboxes. Perhaps she would travel to Argentina to stand at that memorial. Perhaps she would find a small, anonymous city and learn to live without the weight of billions or the burden of apocalyptic truth. She looked at the fading light on the water. The ruins were complete. The silence was finally, truly broken, and in that vast, echoing quiet, Amelia Sterling, for the first time since the laughter on the patio, began to breathe. The air in the little cafe in Bariloche smelled of warm medialunas and strong coffee, a world away from the sterile scent of hospitals or the damp pine of the lake house. Amelia sat by the window, the woven red and green bracelet a stark splash of color against the sleeve of her simple wool sweater. Outside, the snow-capped peaks of the Andes seemed to hold up the vast, impossibly blue sky. She had been here a month, and the sheer, uncomplicated physicality of the place, the wind off the lake, the taste of dulce de leche, the aching beauty of the mountains, acted as a balm on her soul. She had come, as she told no one, because she needed to see the place where Charles's first great sin had been committed, to understand the full weight of the ledger he had left her. The Mina de Plata was a 5-hour drive north, a scar on a rugged hillside. She had gone once, stood at the newly erected simple stone monument etched with names. She had placed flowers, not as a Sterling, but as a penitent. No one recognized her. Here, she was just another foreigner, a woman with quiet eyes and a slow smile. It was in this anonymity that she began to write, not for publication, but for exorcism. In a leather-bound notebook bought from a local artisano, she began to pour out the story. Not the journalistic facts, not the dates and figures, but the human wreckage. The feel of Charles's papery hand in hers, the specific vinegary scent of Alistair's cologne when he leaned in to threaten her, the sound of Penelope's laugh like breaking crystal, the hollow look in Sebastian's eyes the last time she saw him in court. She wrote about the suffocating opulence of the mansion and the profound loneliness of being loved by a haunted man. She wrote about Margot Fitzroy's grief, a monument more enduring than marble. She wrote her own confusion, her rage, her pity, and the terrifying, seductive power of holding the truth like a live wire. The words came slowly at first, then in a torrent, black ink staining her fingers, filling page after page. It was a confession, an accusation, and a lament, all in one. One afternoon, as she packed her notebook and reached for her coat, a man approached her table. He was tall, with the weathered, capable look of someone who worked outdoors, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples. "Disculpe, señora," he said, his Spanish soft, his eyes a warm, concerned brown. "You are the woman who visited the monument last week, yes? At Mina de Plata?" A jolt of alarm, familiar as a heartbeat, shot through her. Had the anonymity been an illusion?
She nodded cautiously. "My name is Raphael. My grandfather, Luis, is on that stone. He died in the second collapse in 78. He didn't sound angry. He sounded weary and curiously resolute. May I sit?" He ordered 2 coffees without asking, and when they arrived, he stirred a spoonful of sugar into his slowly. He said, "We knew, you know, the families. We knew it was no act of God. We knew the supports were rotten, that the managers ignored the warnings. But to us, Sterling Global was like a mountain. You cannot fight a mountain. You can only mourn at its feet." He finally met her eyes. Then the news came, the stories from America, the widow, the journals. He gave a small, incredulous shake of his head. For us, it was like a crack of lightning in a dry forest. It started a fire, not just of anger, of possibility. The lawyers you hired, the evidence you provided to the tribunal, it gave us a voice. For the first time, the mountain listened. Amelia's throat was tight. It was the least I could do. It was justice long overdue. "Justice is a big word," Raphael said softly. "It does not bring back my abuelo, but it brings recognition. It changes the story. Now my children will know their bisabuelo was not a statistic of fate, but a man betrayed by greed. That is a different inheritance." He paused, studying her. "You look tired, señora. Carrying such a truth is a heavy thing, no?" The simple empathy in his question undid her. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at her eyes. She had grown so accustomed to being viewed as a weapon, a symbol, a destroyer, that this plain human kindness felt like a blow. Raphael didn't press. He simply sat with her in silence as she composed herself. When she had wiped her eyes, he said, "My family has a small estancia in the hills beyond the lake. Horses, some cattle, a few guest cabins. It is quiet. The air is clean. If you ever need a place to just be, to not be the woman from the story, you would be welcome." He left a card on the table, just a name, Rafael Ibarra, and a handwritten phone number. Then he paid for the cafes, gave her a small, respectful nod, and was gone. Amelia didn't go to the estancia immediately. She needed to finish her writing, but the offer hung in the back of her mind, a tiny, glowing ember of normalcy. She continued her routine, writing in the cafe, walking the lakeshore, learning enough Spanish to order food and exchange pleasantries. She felt the crushing weight of the past begin, molecule by molecule, to lighten. She was not forgetting, she was integrating. The story was becoming hers, not a ghost that haunted her. A week later, her peace was shattered by a call from Claire Watanabe. The voice on the phone was tense, stripped of its usual professional calm. "Amelia, we have a problem. It's Sebastian." Sebastian Sterling, the dissolute youngest son, had cut a deal. Facing a mosaic of charges from narcotics to cyber fraud, and utterly broken by the family's ruin, he had offered the prosecutors something in exchange for a reduced sentence, a location.
"He claims," Claire said, the words careful and precise, "that his father was even more paranoid than the journals suggest, that he didn't just keep records of sins, he kept trophies, physical evidence, something he called the lockbox, separate from what you found. Sebastian says it's in a secure, private vault in Zurich, under a shell corporation so deep even the journal didn't reference it. He says it contains things that make the mine collapse and the material scandal look like parking tickets. Biometric data sold to hostile governments, orchestrated coups in resource-rich regions, evidence linking Sterling Global to unthinkable things, Amelia, things that could start wars." Amelia's world, which had just begun to solidify into something resembling calm, tilted on its axis again. Why tell us? Why not just give it to the prosecutors? Because he doesn't have the access codes. Only Charles did. And he believes Charles might have left them for you, somewhere you haven't looked, a final fail-safe.
He's desperate, and he's terrified of what might be in that vault if it falls into the wrong hands, now that the company is in free fall. There are other parties interested, ruthless ones. The phrase echoed in her mind. The truth is in the boathouse. For you. Only for you. She had found the journal and the hard drive. Had that been the whole truth? Or was there a deeper layer? A final, horrific circle of hell Charles had been too ashamed to label, but too meticulous not to record. "What does Sebastian want?" Amelia asked, her voice hollow. "He wants immunity, full and total, and he wants you to find the key, access the vault, and hand everything over to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. He wants a clean slate, and he believes this is the only way to incinerate the past so completely that no one can ever come after him again." She paused. "Amelia, I have to advise you that this is exponentially more dangerous. We're talking about state-level secrets. The people who would want to suppress this aren't lawyers. They're spies. They're assassins." Amelia's world, which had just begun to solidify into something resembling calm, tilted on its axis again. Why tell us? Why not just give it to the prosecutors? Because he doesn't have the access codes. Only Charles did. And he believes Charles might have left them for you, somewhere you haven't looked, a final fail-safe. He's desperate, and he's terrified of what might be in that vault if it falls into the wrong hands, now that the company is in free fall. There are other parties interested, ruthless ones. The phrase echoed in her mind. The truth is in the boathouse. For you. Only for you. She had found the journal and the hard drive. Had that been the whole truth? Or was there a deeper layer? A final, horrific circle of hell Charles had been too ashamed to label, but too meticulous not to record. "What does Sebastian want?" Amelia asked, her voice hollow. "He wants immunity, full and total, and he wants you to find the key, access the vault, and hand everything over to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. He wants a clean slate, and he believes this is the only way to incinerate the past so completely that no one can ever come after him again." She paused. "Amelia, I have to advise you that this is exponentially more dangerous. We're talking about state-level secrets. The people who would want to suppress this aren't lawyers. They're spies. They're assassins." Amelia looked out the cafe window at the majestic, indifferent mountains. She thought of Raphael's quiet offer of a cabin in the hills, a life of simple breaths. She closed her eyes and saw Charles in the hospital bed, his grip fierce. Don't be gentle. He hadn't just been talking about his children. He had been talking about the monster itself. He had given her the scalpel to begin the surgery, but the cancer went deeper than he could bring himself to say. The lockbox was the root. "Tell Sebastian I'll do it," she said. The words taste like ash. "But on my terms. I need to see him, face to face, and I need guarantees, in writing, that everything goes to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. No copies, no intermediaries." The meeting was arranged in a secure federal building in New York, a sterile room of gray walls and monitored lines. Sebastian looked like a ghost of his former ghost. His once charming face was gaunt, his eyes darting and feverish. The dissolution had been replaced by a raw, animal fear. "He talked in his sleep, you know," Sebastian rasped, not meeting his eyes. "In the last year, he'd have nightmares. He'd shout numbers, letters, coordinates. Zurich, 7 Alpha Zulu 9, the fallback. I thought it was dementia. Now I think he was rehearsing. He knew he was leaving it to you, the ultimate test, to see if you were strong enough to burn it all down." He finally looked at her, and his expression was of pathetic envy. "He loved you enough to give you the power to destroy him completely. He never loved any of us like that." Amelia felt a surge of nausea. This was not love. This was a man drowning, tying his millstone around the neck of the person on the shore. "The codes," she said flatly. "The numbers," he said. "Write them down." He scribbled on a pad, a jumble of alphanumeric sequences, a Swiss bank name, a vault number. It's a retinal scan and a 24-digit multi-factor code, changed quarterly. The numbers, they're probably the seed for the algorithm. You'd need a cryptographer, and the bank won't just let you in. You need the physical key, too, a titanium fob. He never let it out of his sight. The key, the small, intricate silver key she wore around her neck, had opened the lockbox in the boathouse. She had assumed that was its only purpose. But was it a key or a key? A template? She left Sebastian, his fate now tethered to hers in a final, twisted pact. Back at the lake house, which now felt less like a refuge and more like a crime scene, Amelia emptied the lockbox again. She studied the silver key under a magnifying glass. Along its stem, so finely etched they looked like mere scratches, were a series of minuscule lines and dots. A serial number? A binary code? She photographed it, sent the images to a discreet contact Claire had in digital forensics. The reply came hours later. "It's a micro-engraving, not a serial. It's a topographic map reference, extremely precise. The coordinates point to a location on this property, specifically to the old well, the one that was capped 30 years ago." The well was a stone circle, half hidden by brambles at the edge of the woods behind the house. It took her half a day to clear it. The cap was a heavy, iron-reinforced concrete disc. Using a crowbar, her muscles screaming, she managed to shift it a few inches, revealing not a drop of water, but a dry shaft with rusted rungs bolted into the stone. A climbing harness and a powerful flashlight, bought with cash in a distant town, became her tools. The descent was a journey into the Earth's cold belly. The air smelled of damp stone and age. At the bottom, not 20 feet down, the shaft opened into a small man-made chamber. And there, in the center, on a simple pedestal, sat a small, sleek titanium case, and beside it, a single, unlabeled manila envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope first. It contained a single sheet of paper in Charles's unmistakable hand. "Amelia, if you are reading this, you have come further than I ever dared hope, and further than I ever feared. The case before you is not a truth. It is a curse. It contains the sins I was too cowardly to confess, even to myself. Transactions that traded blood for oil, that silenced democracies for mining rights, that turned human beings into data points to be sold. It proves that the foundation of our modern world, the one I helped build, is not just cracked, but drenched in innocent blood. The key around your neck, combined with the codes Sebastian doubtless gave you, he was always listening, will open the vault in Zurich. I leave you with a final, terrible choice. You can use it. You can unleash this truth, and in doing so, you will destabilize governments, ignite conflicts, and likely paint a target on your own back that no amount of hiding will remove. The world may not be ready for this fire." Or you can take the case to the coordinates also engraved on the key, a different set, for a furnace in a Swiss secure facility, and destroy it. Let the deepest darkness remain buried with me. Take the wealth that remains, clean, and live. Truly live. I have no right to ask anything of you. I have loaded you with burdens no soul should carry. But as I loved you, in my flawed and poisoned way, I give you this, the power to choose the scale of the ruin. Forgive me, my dearest, for all of it. Charles. Amelia sat on the cold stone floor, the letter in one hand, the cold titanium case in the other. This was it, the ultimate threshold, to be gentle or to follow his first command to its apocalyptic conclusion. The world thought the Sterling saga was over. She could make it so. She could vanish to Raphael's estancia, or some other corner of the earth, and let the deepest secrets turn to ash. she could have peace. She thought of the miners' names on the stone, of Eleanor's unmarked poisoning, of Margot's decades of silence, of the woven bracelet on her wrist. Justice was a big word, Raphael had said, but it was the only word left in her vocabulary. Charles, in his agonized cowardice, had built a back door, a final out for his own conscience. He wanted her to have the choice he never had, but by giving her the choice, he had already made it for her. A truth this monumental did not belong to her. It did not belong to the sterling legacy. It belonged to the world, no matter the cost. She climbed out of the well, the titanium case strapped securely to her side. She did not go to the Swiss furnace. She went to Zurich with Claire's contacts and a team of ICC observers. The vault, hidden beneath a boutique watchmaker's, was a marvel of security. The retinal scan used a digital reconstruction from Charles's medical records. The 24-digit code, derived from the number Sebastian provided and the algorithm from the cryptographer, was accepted. The titanium fob, its micro-engraving now understood, slid into its slot. The vault door hissed open. Inside were not just files. There were vials of blood samples from political opponents, tagged with genetic codes. There were signed contracts for private mercenary armies to overthrow a duly elected government in West Africa. There were detailed schematics for cyber weapons sold to a rogue state. And at the center, a simple ledger, older than the journal, listing payments for asset termination with chilling brevity. The lockbox was not a metaphor. It was a coffin for the soul of the century. Amelia handed it all over to the stern-faced prosecutors from The Hague. She gave a final, sworn deposition, and then, under a new name provided by those same authorities who now saw her as both a vital witness and a walking liability, she disappeared. She did not go to Raphael's estancia. To go there would be to bring a tsunami to his quiet shore. Instead, she went further, to a remote coastal town in another country, where she painted landscapes that never quite captured the storms in her memory, and wrote letters to no one. The world convulsed with the new revelations. Governments fell. Investigations were launched. The name Sterling became synonymous not just with greed, but with a particular, pervasive evil. Sometimes, on a clear night, she would look at the stars and wonder if she had chosen rightly. She had been called a gold digger, then a truth-teller, then an avenger. Now she was a ghost, but she was a free ghost. The ruins were finally, utterly complete. There was nothing left to dig for, no truth left to wield. There was only the slow, patient work of learning how to live in the silence she had chosen, with the weight of the world's darkest secrets no longer in her hands, but forever etched upon her soul. And in that profound and terrible quiet, she finally began not just to breathe, but to heal. The small whitewashed house in the fishing village of Porto Roca clung to the cliffs like a seabird's nest. Its only luxuries were the wide window facing the endless, moody expanse of the Atlantic, and the silence, a deep, resonant quiet broken only by the wind's sigh and the distant cry of gulls. Here, she was Lena Costa. She painted, not the grand, dramatic landscapes a tourist might buy, but small, intricate studies of light on water, of the gnarled olive tree in the courtyard, of the way mist gathered in the valley at dawn. The colors were muted, the compositions still. They were, I supposed, exercises in peace, a desperate, daily training to see only surface, only the fleeting beauty of the present moment. For a year, the world's storms seemed distant. The occasional newspaper in the village cafe, left by a rare tourist, might carry a small follow-up article about the Sterling unraveling or the Forsyth verdict, but they felt like reports from another galaxy. She followed the woven pulsera's example. It had frayed, the colors faded from salt air and sun, but she kept it on her wrist, a humble talisman. She was not Amelia Sterling, the widow who broke an empire. She was Lena, the quiet painter who bought her fish from old Manuel and her bread from Sophia's bakery. The weight in her chest, once a crushing boulder of secrets and guilt, had shrunk to a dense, smooth stone, always present, but something she could carry. The first crack in this fragile piece was a letter. It arrived not at her door, but care of the bakery, a minor breach in the careful protocols the Hague had established. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and achingly familiar. Margot Fitzroy. The stamp was Swiss. Lena, I hope this name finds you in a place of calm. I will not say peace, for I suspect that is too much to ask of either of us. I write with news that is neither good nor bad, but simply final. Arthur Forsyth died in his prison cell last night. Not by violence, authorities say. His heart, they claim, simply gave out. I prefer to think his conscience, having lain dormant for 50 years, finally awoke and found the weight of its own existence intolerable. A fanciful notion, perhaps. With his death, the last living actor in my sister's specific tragedy is gone. The legal machinations will sputter on, but the story, our story, has reached its natural end. There is no one to blame, no one to punish. There is only memory and the long work of living with it. I have donated the remainder of my funds to the Cancer Research Institute in Eleanor's name. I am moving to a small flat in Lausanne. My own energy for vengeance, for truth-seeking, is spent. I find I am tired. A good tired. I do not know what you carry from that final vault. I do not wish to know. Some darkness is meant to be absorbed by institutions, not individuals. You chose to give it to the world, and the world is convulsing accordingly. That was your burden. Let it go now.
Be Lena, however you can. Yours in shared silence, Margot. Amelia, Lena, held the letter to her chest, feeling the old, complicated knot of grief and solidarity tighten. Margot was right. The last external thread of the tapestry had been cut. The story was over. So why did the stone in her chest not dissolve? The answer came weeks later, not in a letter, but in a dream. She was back in the dry well, but instead of the titanium case, Charles stood there, not as the frail old man, nor the ruthless Titan, but as a man in his prime, his face etched with a profound, weary sorrow. He said nothing. He simply held out his hands, palms up. In one lay a single, glowing ember. In the other, a perfect, smooth sea stone, cool and gray. He looked at her, his eyes asking the question he had written in the well. Which will you carry? She woke with a start, the dawn light bleeding into the sky over the ocean. The dream's meaning was not cryptic. The ember was the truth, the destructive, purifying, world-altering fire. The stone was the burden of silence, the weight of simply enduring. She had chosen the ember, she had unleashed the fire, but she had never stopped carrying the stone, too. She had mistaken the act of disclosure for the act of release. But giving the truth away was not the same as being free of it. That morning, she did not paint. She walked, past the village, up the steep coastal path to a high, lonely promontory where the wind whipped her hair and stole her breath. She stood at the edge, looking at the furious, churning sea below. The urge to scream was immense, to pour every secret, every betrayal, every moment of terror and rage into the void. But she did not. The wind would just take it. The sea would not care. Instead, she did something she had not allowed herself to do since the hospital room. She spoke to Charles, not the ghost in her dreams, but the memory in her heart. You were a coward. You were weak, and you were cruel, and you built a world on rot. And you were kind to me. You were the only person who saw me, not a transaction. You gave me a love that was real.
and you poisoned it at the source. You made me your confessor, your executioner, and your heir to a kingdom of ghosts." She was crying now, the salt of her tears the same as the sea spray. "I loved you, and I hate you for what you gave me. And I am so, so tired of carrying your choices." She knelt on the rough grass, the stone of her grief a physical pressure behind her ribs. She didn't fight it. She let it be. She let the love and the hate, the pity and the fury exist together in the same shattered space. She stopped trying to sort the legacy into boxes of good and evil. Charles was all of it, and so was she. She was not an innocent victim. She was the willing participant in a great, tragic unraveling. She had been used, yes, but she had also wielded the shears with a steady hand. The realization was not a lightning bolt of absolution. It was a slow, gray dawn. There was no forgiveness, not for him, not for herself. There was only acceptance. The story was not something that happened to her. It was something she had done. She had chosen, at every terrible crossroads, to dig deeper, to brine brighter. She had called it justice, and perhaps it was, but it was also her path. She stood, her legs shaky. The sea continued its endless, indifferent work. The stone in her chest was still there, but its edges felt less sharp. It was not a foreign object anymore. It was a part of her geology, a fossil of a cataclysm. When she returned to the whitewashed house, she did something she had avoided for a year. She unpacked the single, small crate of things she had brought from the lake house. Not the journals or the hard drives. Those were with the Hague or destroyed. But the small things. A book of poetry Charles had inscribed to her. A shell they'd picked up on a long-ago beach walk. A photograph of them, not at a gala, but in the library. Him looking at her with that unguarded tenderness that had been her undoing. She placed the shell on the windowsill. She put the book on her shelf. She looked at the photograph for a long time, then put it in a drawer. She did not need to look at it every day, but she no longer needed to hide it from herself. He was her past, a terrible, beautiful, ruinous part of it. The painting that emerged from her that week was different. It was of the promontory, but not as a place of storm. She painted the moment after the storm, when the clouds break and a single lance-like ray of sunlight pierces the gray, illuminating a patch of turbulent emerald green sea. The light was not gentle. It was violent, glorious, and transient. She called it the reckoning. She began to sleep through the night. The taste of food returned. She smiled at Sophia's gossip, really smiled. She was not happy. That seemed a foreign country. But she was present. She was Lena Costa, a woman who painted, who walked by the sea, who carried a history in the set of her shoulders and the quiet in her eyes. One afternoon, a package arrived. It was from Claire Watanabe, forwarded through a labyrinth of security. Inside was no note, just a small, polished wooden box. Within it, nestled on velvet, was a simple silver key. Not the intricate one from the lockbox, a new key. Attached was a tiny tag, for the next door whenever you are ready to turn it. Amelia, Lena, held the key in her palm. It was not a key to a vault of secrets. It was a key to a future, a symbolic gesture from a friend who knew she had handed over every key to her past. She felt no fear, no dread of what it might unlock, only a faint, curious warmth. She placed the key on a hook by her door, next to her own mundane house key. She looked from one to the other. Both promised entry, one to a shelter, another to an unknown path. She picked up her sketchbook and went outside. The late afternoon sun gilded the village roofs. Old Manuel was mending his nets on the quay, his motions slow and sure. A child left somewhere. The world, in its small, perfect way, continued. She sat on her doorstep, the sketchbook open on her knees. She did not draw the sea, or the cliffs, or the light. She began, very carefully, to draw her own hand, the lines of her palm, the faded threads of the posetta on her wrist. It was an act of reclamation, of seeing herself not as a vessel for a story, but as a person. Marked, yes, but whole. The title they had given her was gone. The gold digger, the truth teller, the widow, the avenger, all were ghosts now, whispering in the language she no longer needed to speak. The ruins were not just around her, they were within her, and she had learned to walk among them without cutting her feet. She looked out at the vast, breathing ocean, then down at the emerging lines on the page. The story, the great, sweeping epic of betrayal and vengeance, was complete. But the life, her life, was just beginning. And for the first time, the prospect did not feel like a sentence, but like a slow, deep, and cautiously welcomed breath.